As for you giving yourself pious airs about your motherhood, why, a cat's a better mother than you are.
Hollywood was undeniably racist, and there's no doubt about it. From 1898 to 1920, the industry was dominated by white men. Black characters were often portrayed as clowns or servants at best, and as dangerous stereotypes, such as sexual predators, at worst. It wasn't just the movies. The studios and even the most popular actors of the time displayed racist attitudes. Racism was so pervasive that, in 1916, two black brothers, Noble and George Johnson, founded a completely black-run company in response to the industry's exclusion and stereotypes. Let's dive deep into history and uncover the actors, directors, producers, and studios who were unapologetically opposed to racial equality. Clark Gable. To everyone else, Clark Gable was the ultimate Hollywood heartthrob, Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind, and the King of Hollywood. People adored him, and for good reason. He was a fantastic actor with a charm that seemed larger than life. But behind that dashing smile and gentlemanly image lay a more complicated truth. Gable's off-screen life was far from the polished perfection he portrayed on screen, and reports of his racist behavior tell a darker, messier story. One of the most well-known examples involves Hattie McDaniel, the actress who played Mammy in Gone with the Wind. McDaniel made history by becoming the first African-American to win an Academy Award for her role, a groundbreaking moment in Hollywood history. Gable publicly supported McDaniel, attending her Oscar ceremony and speaking highly of her work. On the surface, it seemed like a progressive gesture for the time. But behind closed doors, McDaniel reportedly revealed that Gable often used the N-word casually in conversation. It's a revelation that complicates the public image of a man many saw as a hero. Even so, there were times when Gable's actions seemed to contradict these racist tendencies. While filming Gone with the Wind, Gable discovered that the studio's bathrooms were segregated. Outraged, he threatened to walk off the set unless the facilities were integrated. The studio quickly complied, removing the whites-only and colored signs. This act of defiance painted Gable in a more progressive light, as someone willing to use his star power to stand up against discriminatory practices. But moments like these, while commendable, can't erase the harm caused by his language and private behavior. Gable's willingness to take a stand against segregation was overshadowed by the casual racism he exhibited in his personal life. It's a stark reminder that people are complex, and their actions often reveal contradictions. Adding to his complexity, Gable's relationships with his black colleagues varied. While he stood by Hattie McDaniel in some public instances, he never spoke out about the broader racial inequalities in Hollywood or advocated for greater inclusion. His progressive gestures seem more like isolated acts rather than part of a larger commitment to equality. Clark Gable remains a beloved Hollywood legend, but his legacy, like so many others from that era, is tangled. His charm and talent captivated audiences, but his actions behind the scenes tell a story of a man who, like his time, was far from perfect. It leaves us wondering, can we celebrate his contributions to cinema while acknowledging the prejudices he carried? The answer isn't easy, but it's a question worth asking. Walter Brennan. Walter Brennan might be remembered as one of the greatest character actors in Hollywood history, but there's a side to him that most people don't talk about. Sure, he won 3 Oscars and starred in classics like The Westerner and Rio Bravo, but off-screen, Brennan had some seriously messed up views that would make anyone cringe today. Here's the thing. Brennan wasn't just your typical old-school conservative. He was a proud member of the John Birch Society, a group that outright supported segregation and was all about keeping things the way they used to be. And when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, Brennan's reaction was downright horrifying. People on the set of The Guns of Will Sonnet said he laughed, cheered, and even danced around when he heard the news. Just let that sink in for a second. The man who charmed millions on screen celebrated one of the darkest moments in American history. It gets worse. Brennan reportedly recorded an album called Negroes and the Civil Rights. Just the title alone tells you everything you need to know. The content? Pure racist propaganda. This wasn't just some guy with outdated views. This was someone actively promoting hate, and he didn't stop there. On movie sets and in his personal life, Brennan was known for throwing around racial slurs like they were nothing. He openly treated minorities with disrespect, making it clear he wasn't interested in hiding how he really felt. If you didn't look like him or think like him, you were either a communist or someone he flat out didn't respect. For fans of his work, it's a tough pill to swallow. How do you reconcile the lovable old man from the real McCoys with someone who was so hateful in real life? It's a reminder that sometimes the people we admire on screen aren't who we think they are. Walter Brennan's story forces us to ask a tough question. Can we separate the art from the artist? William Froley. Let's talk about William Froley, the man who brought Fred Mertz to life on I Love Lucy. He was the grumpy landlord everyone loved to hate and a comedic genius in his own right. But off camera, that's a whole different story. Froley had a fiery temper, a notorious drinking problem, and let's not sugarcoat it, some seriously problematic views. On set, Froley was known for being difficult. Writer Bob Schiller once shared that Froley wasn't shy about throwing around racial slurs, even at his co-star Desi Arnaz, who played Ricky Ricardo. It's hard to imagine the man who helped make I Love Lucy a success openly disrespecting the very people he worked with. But that's the complicated reality of William Froley. Some said his mindset was so outdated he might have been better suited for the 1920s. The tension didn't stop there. Froley's relationship with Vivian Vance, who played his on-screen wife Ethel, was downright hostile. Things got ugly early on when Froley overheard Vance joking that he was old enough to play her father. That comment sparked years of animosity between the two. They barely spoke off camera, and when they did, it was more like trading insults than friendly banter. After I Love Lucy ended, Vance was offered a spin-off with Froley. Her response? A hard number. She wanted nothing to do with him. Despite the drama, Froley managed to keep working. He starred in My Three Sons for 5 seasons until health problems forced him to retire. Still, his personality didn't change much. In fact, his feuds with co-stars and offensive comments stayed with him until the end. When Froley passed away in 1966 from a heart attack, Vivian Vance reportedly toasted to the news with champagne, saying, "Champagne for everyone." Ouch. That might seem harsh, but it shows just how deeply their animosity ran. Even with all the behind-the-scenes turmoil, Fred and Ethel Mertz remain one of TV's most iconic duos. Their chemistry on screen made millions laugh, but it's tough to ignore the darker side of William Froley. So what do we do with this information? Can we separate the art from the artist? That's up to you. Walt Disney. Just hearing the name makes you think of magical castles, beloved characters, and stories that have defined generations of childhoods. From Snow White to Cinderella and The Lion King, Disney's work brought joy to millions. But there's a darker side to the man behind the magic, a side that's as controversial as it is complicated. For decades, rumors of anti-Semitism have shadowed Disney's legacy. Art Babbitt, one of Disney's own animators, claimed that Walt attended meetings of the German-American Bund, a pro-Nazi group in the U.S. Think about that for a second. The man behind wholesome, family-friendly films allegedly mingling with Nazi sympathizers. It's a shocking accusation, and though Disney never publicly confirmed or denied it, the rumors have persisted. The controversies didn't end there. In 1938, Disney hosted Nazi filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl shortly after Kristallnacht, the violent attack on Jewish communities in Germany. While the world condemned these atrocities, Disney rolled out the red carpet for Hitler's favorite filmmaker. Critics say it showed a troubling lack of awareness, or worse, a sign of his own prejudices. Then there's the issue of racial insensitivity in Disney's films. Dumbo featured racist caricatures in the form of the crows, while Song of the South glorified a plantation-era South in ways that sparked outrage. Even behind the scenes, Disney was known for making derogatory comments, particularly about Jewish individuals. Mexican-born animator Bill Melendez, famous for his work on Peanuts, once described Disney as having strong, negative opinions about Jews, especially those from New York. Yet Disney's legacy isn't entirely defined by these controversies. In 1957, he hired Floyd Norman, the studio's first African-American animator, marking a step toward inclusivity. While it was a small move, it hinted at a slow evolution in attitudes. So how do we reconcile the man who created so much joy with the one accused of harboring prejudices? It's a question that doesn't have an easy answer. Disney's work has undeniably shaped the entertainment world, but his personal views remind us that even the brightest legacies can have shadows. What do you think? Can we separate magic from man? John Wayne. When you talk about John Wayne, you get in images of a rugged cowboy standing tall as a symbol of American strength and independence. For decades, he was Hollywood's ultimate leading man, embodying the kind of no-nonsense patriotism that made audiences cheer. But behind the iconic roles in films like True Grit and The Searchers, Wayne held some deeply troubling views that have cast a long shadow over his legacy. The most infamous glimpse into Wayne's mindset came from a 1971 Playboy interview. In it, he said, "I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility." Let that sink in. A man celebrated as a hero on screen openly endorsed white supremacy, tying it to a patronizing and dehumanizing idea of education. And that wasn't all. He also dismissed the horrors of slavery, saying he felt no remorse for it because, in his words, it's just a fact of life. Wayne's disdain wasn't limited to African Americans. He took aim at Native Americans, criticizing films that depicted their mistreatment. "I don't feel we did wrong in taking this great country away from them," he said. "Our so-called stealing of this country was just a matter of survival." His remarks seemed to justify centuries of oppression and violence with a shrug of inevitability, showing a shocking lack of empathy. But Wayne's views extended beyond race. He also criticized women's roles in society and made homophobic remarks about films like Midnight Cowboy. It's hard to reconcile the heroic cowboy image with someone so dismissive of marginalized groups. The fallout from these statements continues to this day. Protests have led to the removal of exhibits honoring Wayne, including one at the University of Southern California. There have also been efforts to rename John Wayne Airport in Orange County, though those attempts have yet to succeed. For many, his words are a reminder of an era when such views were far too common and far too accepted. So how do we remember John Wayne? For some, he's still the ultimate cowboy, a symbol of classic Hollywood's golden age. For others, he represents the harmful ideologies that have no place in today's world. It's up to each of us to decide if we can separate the man from the legend. What do you think? James Stewart. When you think of James Stewart, you probably picture the all-American good guy, charming, principled, and impossibly likable. From his iconic roles in It's a Wonderful Life and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington to his darker performances in Vertigo and Rear Window, Stewart built a legacy as one of old Hollywood's most beloved stars. But behind the scenes, his story is more complicated. Stewart's upbringing in a predominantly white Indiana town and his elite education at Princeton left him with limited exposure to diversity. This background likely contributed to his troubling attitudes toward race. On the set of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, Woody Strode, a black actor, accused Stewart of making racist remarks. Strode claimed that Stewart's behavior became so offensive that director John Ford had to step in and mediate. And it wasn't just isolated incidents. Stewart's conservative values aligned closely with FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, and their relationship went beyond admiration. Stewart reportedly acted as an informant during Hollywood's communist witch hunts, providing names of colleagues he deemed suspicious. This led to a bitter falling out with his longtime friend Henry Fonda, who was horrified by Stewart's actions. In 1971, Stewart's controversial attitudes were further exposed during the short-lived Jimmy Stewart Show. Hal Williams, a black actor, was initially cast for a significant role, but Stewart reportedly refused to work with him. He demanded a white replacement, claiming he didn't want to see a black actor lecturing his character on primetime TV. Stewart's explosive response included the troubling statement, "Blacks are bossing white people all over the country." Despite these allegations, Stewart's wholesome public persona remained largely intact during his lifetime. His films continue to be celebrated as classics, but these revelations cast a shadow over his legacy. Can we reconcile the man whose characters inspired hope with the one whose private views reflected intolerance? That's a question we're still grappling with today. Charlie Chaplin. The name instantly conjures images of the iconic tramp, with his bowler hat, cane, and unforgettable comedic timing. Chaplin was a pioneer of silent film, using his craft to make audiences laugh, cry, and think. Films like City Lights and The Great Dictator showcase his genius, and his work often championed the underdog. But behind the camera, Chaplin was far more complicated than his charming on-screen persona. For all the empathy he portrayed in his films, Chaplin has been accused of holding prejudiced views in real life. Virginia Cherrill, his co-star in City Lights, claimed in her memoir that Chaplin made racist remarks about black people. This revelation stands in stark contrast to the man whose films often explore themes of humanity and compassion. How could someone who so effectively captured the struggles of the marginalized harbor such views? Chaplin's personal controversies didn't end there. His associations with leftist politics during the height of the Red Scare and his alleged disdain for those who didn't share his worldview made him a polarizing figure in Hollywood. Though he outwardly critiqued fascism in The Great Dictator, his actions and remarks behind the scenes painted a more conflicted picture. It's also worth noting that Chaplin's behavior often pushed societal boundaries, and not always in admirable ways. Beyond his alleged racist comments, his relationships with much younger women, including marrying 16-year-old Lita Gray when he was 35, sparked criticism even during his time. So where does this leave Chaplin's legacy? On one hand, he's an undisputed cinematic genius who helped shape the language of film. On the other, his personal flaws are hard to ignore. Can we separate the man who made the world laugh from the man whose off-screen behavior leaves us uncomfortable? That's a question only you can answer. Katherine Hepburn. Katherine Hepburn. Her name is synonymous with strong, independent women on screen, the kind of characters who could hold their own in a man's world. With 4 Academy Awards and a career spanning over 6 decades, Hepburn was a Hollywood trailblazer. But like many icons of her time, her private views were far more complicated than the progressive image she projected. During World War II, Hepburn reportedly held prejudiced views against Japanese people, reflecting the widespread anti-Japanese sentiment in America after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Biographer A. Scott Berg highlighted how this prejudice influenced her private conversations, revealing a stark contrast to the intelligent and open-minded characters she played on screen. While it's true that such views were sadly common during the war, it doesn't make them any easier to reconcile with her legacy. Hepburn's disdain for Japanese culture was reportedly so strong that she refused to participate in productions or initiatives involving Japan or Japanese Americans during the war years. Her perspective mirrored the broader societal fear and anger at the time, but as someone so admired, it feels disappointing to imagine her contributing to that narrative. However, like many, Hepburn's views evolved over time. While she never publicly addressed these prejudices, her later interviews and work seem to lean toward greater empathy and inclusivity. She championed strong, complex women in her films and supported civil rights movements in her later years, which seemed to reflect a shift in her perspective. So how do we view Katherine Hepburn today? She remains a legend, a symbol of resilience and talent in Hollywood's golden age. But her story also reminds us that even our heroes are flawed, shaped by the prejudices and pressures of their era. It leaves us asking, can we admire the progressive roles she played while acknowledging the limitations of her own beliefs? That's for you to decide. Vivian Lee. When you think of Vivian Lee, you picture beauty, grace, and one of the most iconic performances in Hollywood history, Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. She captured audiences with her elegance and fiery personality, winning 2 Academy Awards and cementing her place as one of old Hollywood's brightest stars. But beneath the glamour and talent was a more troubling side of Lee that many fans don't know about. Lee's biographer, Ann Edwards, revealed that the actress often made derogatory remarks about black people. While filming Gone with the Wind, a movie already steeped in controversy for its romanticized portrayal of the antebellum South, Lee reportedly voiced prejudiced views that mirrored the era and environment the film depicted. Her comments about race, though common among certain circles at the time, stand in stark contrast to the poised and progressive image she portrayed on screen. Lee's on-set behavior also drew criticism. Co-workers noted her ability to charm when it suited her, but she could be cutting and dismissive toward those she deemed beneath her. While she shared warm professional relationships with some of her black co-stars, such as Hattie McDaniel, her offhand remarks painted a more complicated picture of her attitudes toward race. Mental illness played a significant role in Lee's life, and some have speculated that her struggles with bipolar disorder may have contributed to her erratic behavior and sharp tongue. However, it's impossible to ignore the lasting impact of her words and the biases she carried, shaped by the time and society in which she lived. Vivian Lee's legacy is as complicated as it is dazzling. She remains a symbol of old Hollywood's golden age, celebrated for her talent and beauty. But her prejudices remind us that even the most revered stars were not immune to the biases of their era. Can we admire her artistry while acknowledging her flaws? That's for you to decide. Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper. The name alone evokes images of the quintessential American hero, rugged, stoic, and morally upright. From High Noon to Sergeant York, Cooper's performances cemented his place as one of Hollywood's golden age legends. But behind the camera, the man hailed as the everyman carried a darker side that complicates his legacy. Stories of his off-screen behavior reveal a man whose views were far from the virtuous characters he often portrayed. Cooper's co-star Ann Astin once shared a troubling insight. Cooper frequently used derogatory terms when referring to Jewish people. These weren't just offhand remarks, but part of a pattern of anti-Semitic behavior that raised eyebrows even in his own time. For someone so revered in Hollywood, an industry built on the contributions of many Jewish creatives, this behavior feels especially jarring. But his prejudices didn't stop there. Cooper was an active participant in Hollywood's Red Scare during the 1940s and 50s, a period when fear of communism swept through the industry. Cooper testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, offering his support for the anti-communist crusade. While his testimony didn't name names, his alignment with the movement reflected his discomfort with progressive values and diversity creeping into Hollywood's narratives. Adding to this complexity, Cooper's friendships and alliances were revealing. He was closely associated with conservative groups that opposed civil rights initiatives and supported segregationist policies. While he rarely spoke publicly on these issues, his social circles and private comments suggested a man unwilling, or unable, to challenge the prejudices of his time. For fans of his work, these revelations are hard to reconcile. How do we align the brave marshal in High Noon, who stands alone to defend his principles, with a man whose personal views were exclusionary? Cooper's life, like many of his era, reminds us of the stark divide between the ideals Hollywood sold on screen and the reality of its stars' beliefs. Even today, Gary Cooper's legacy as a film icon remains intact, celebrated for his contributions to cinema. But the shadows of his personal biases linger, forcing us to confront the imperfections of those we admire. Do we separate the man from the myth, or do we let both inform how we remember him? That's the question his story leaves us with. Marlon Brando. The name alone is synonymous with brilliance and rebellion in Hollywood. From A Streetcar Named Desire to The Godfather, Brando transformed acting with his raw, method style, captivating audiences, and earning a reputation as one of the greatest performers of all time. But beyond the screen, Brando's personal life was a web of contradictions, and rumors of his racist remarks add a troubling layer to his legacy. Actress Rita Moreno, who shared a romantic relationship with Brando, revealed a more unsettling side of the star. According to Moreno, Brando occasionally made racist comments during their time together. Coming from someone who later became an outspoken advocate for civil rights and indigenous causes, these allegations feel deeply incongruous with the public image Brando cultivated later in life. Brando's activism, particularly in the 1960s and 1970s, showcased a man seemingly committed to fighting for equality. He famously refused his 1973 Oscar for The Godfather, sending indigenous activist Sachin Littlefeather to the ceremony in his place to protest Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans. This act of defiance turned Brando into a symbol of social justice. Yet the allegations from Moreno and whispers from others who knew him suggest that his private behavior didn't always align with his public stances. Brando's complexity didn't end with race. His relationships with women, his erratic behavior on set, and his famously difficult personality paint a picture of a man who could be both brilliant and deeply flawed. Those who worked with him often described him as temperamental, someone capable of great empathy one moment and scathing cruelty the next. It's hard to reconcile the Brando who championed civil rights with the Brando accused of holding prejudices himself. Was he a man evolving with the times, or someone whose activism was more performative than genuine? We may never know the full truth. Bing Crosby. His velvety voice and charm defined an era, making him one of the most iconic entertainers of the 20th century. From his classic recordings like White Christmas to his memorable performances in Holiday Inn and The Road to Films, Crosby seemed like the perfect gentleman on screen and on stage. But behind the crooner's polished image lay a more troubling reality that his fans never saw. According to Gary Crosby, Bing's eldest son, the beloved star often made racist jokes at home. Gary revealed that his father's private conversations included derogatory remarks and insensitive humor about minorities. These weren't just isolated instances. They were reportedly a part of his everyday language, shocking given Crosby's squeaky clean public persona. What makes this even more complex is Crosby's widespread influence. At the height of his career, he was not only a star, but a symbol of American culture. His work, including his portrayal of a priest in Going My Way, painted him as a figure of kindness and morality. Yet the Crosby that Gary and others knew at home painted a very different picture. Crosby's racism was kept hidden from the public, allowing his career to remain largely unscathed. Unlike contemporaries whose prejudices became widely known, Crosby's carefully managed image helped him maintain his status as an American icon. But for those who were close to him, his private behavior couldn't be ignored. Today, Crosby's legacy remains complicated. While his contributions to music and film are undeniable, the revelations about his personal life leave a sour note. It's another reminder that even the brightest stars can carry shadows, forcing us to ask, can we separate the artist from their art? In Crosby's case, it's a question his fans are still grappling with. Fred Astaire. Fred Astaire. His name is synonymous with elegance, charm, and the kind of effortless grace that made him a Hollywood legend. With his iconic routines in films like Top Hat and Swing Time, Astaire set the gold standard for dance and cinema. His collaborations, including his famous partnership with Ginger Rogers, cemented his place in entertainment history. But behind the glitz and glamour, Astaire's story includes some troubling aspects that are often overlooked. Biographer Sarah Giles brought to light an uncomfortable truth about the beloved dancer. Astaire harbored prejudiced views toward black people. While his career included collaborations with performers like Bill Bojangles Robinson, a pioneering black entertainer, Astaire's personal beliefs were far less inclusive. It's a jarring contradiction, working alongside and benefiting from the artistry of black performers while holding biases against them. One incident that stands out involves Astaire's infamous Bojangles of Harlem routine in Swing Time. The number, intended as a tribute to Bill Robinson, featured Astaire performing in blackface. While such portrayals were disturbingly common in Astaire's era, it's hard to separate the routine from the broader context of racial insensitivity that permeated Hollywood at the time. The choice to perform it reflected not just industry norms, but also a personal blind spot in Astaire's understanding of race. Astaire's public image was one of charm and sophistication, but his private views complicate that legacy. While he wasn't openly hostile or aggressive in his prejudices, the attitudes revealed by Giles paint a picture of someone shaped by the biases of his time. For fans who admired his artistry, these revelations are difficult to reconcile with the man they thought they knew. Old Hollywood may have dazzled audiences with its glamorous stars and timeless films, but beneath the surface, things were far from perfect. Many of the era's biggest names held troubling and outdated beliefs that tarnish their legacies today. Racism wasn't just a societal issue, it was deeply rooted in Hollywood itself. Join Factsverse as we uncover the darker side of classic Hollywood and reveal the stars whose off-camera actions were far from the characters they played on screen.